guess I'll put my camera on so I can pig out. Let me see if there's any good.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Hare Krishna. Thank you for being here. And we're here at the Bhaktivedanta Institute headquarters in Gainesville, Florida. We have some guests here joining us today. Today, we are doing session 2 of the Richard L. Thompson lecture series. So this is the second part of our ongoing lecture series based on the books of Sadaputa or Richard L. Thompson. And we're going to be covering all 6 of his major books, starting with the Mechanistic and Non-Mechanistic Science, published in 1981. So a little bit of the history behind this publication. The first project assigned by Srila Prabhupada in January of 1975 to the newly formed Bhaktivedanta Institute was to write a book called The Origin of Life and Matter. And so Sadaputa Das wrote the book Mechanistic and Non-Mechanistic Science in an effort to do something along the lines of what was requested. And then this book was produced by the BTG in Philadelphia with Jayadvaita Swami as the editor, Yamaraj as layout, and Sita in typesetting, as well as other devotees. And if you were with us 2 weeks ago on February 4th, Brahmatirtha discussed the introduction to this book, where Sadaputa explains that although the current mechanistic worldview implies that everything is a machine made of matter, Bhakti Yoga, quote, is methodologically superior to modern science and goes beyond modern science by providing the individual with practical methods of developing higher cognitive powers that lie dormant in the conscious self, end quote. So today we have Parma Karuna, who is the principal engineer at Intel Corporation in Portland, Oregon, in the area of microprocessor security architecture. He has a BTech degree in electrical engineering from IIT Roorkee and an MS in computer science from BITS Pilani. And he has 2 sons, Gopal and Rama, who are currently studying mathematics at MIT. And so Parma Karuna, thank you for joining us. He's going to be speaking today about on chapter 1, searching past the mechanics of perception. So thank you for being with us, for speaking on this first chapter. It's very nice to see you. You may go ahead.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much. And I see His Holiness Hridayanda Maharaj and Brahmatirtha Prabhu, very, very respected Vaishnavas, very close to my heart. Thank you so much for being here. If I have your permission, I would like to proceed. Thank you. So, Mechanistic and Non-Mechanistic Science is an absolutely wonderful book by His Grace Sadaputa Prabhu. His brilliance just shows through every book, but especially this book. And I was asked by Mother Prishni to prepare a summary of chapter 1. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. I have a few slides. Are the slides visible now?
Yes.
Okay. So this is going to be a very quick summary of Mechanistic and Non-Mechanistic Science, Chapter 1. And I had originally prepared this talk, which was about an hour for both the introduction and Chapter 1. So Chapter 1 should take less than an hour. So I hope that timeline is acceptable. So Sadaputa Prabhu begins the chapter with a description or his thoughts on the deficiency of modern science. And especially he brings out that this is no more prominently brought out than in life sciences. And life sciences have, or the scientists in the life sciences area have made very bold claims that all life can be explained by physics and chemistry, even thinking, feeling, and willing. So it's a very, very bold claim. Of course, there are some counter arguments. We had an internal discussion about it about a year or about 6 months ago. And one of the counter arguments is that if even thinking, willing, and feeling is explained by mechanistic theories, then criminals should never be punished. Nobody should be held accountable. So anyway, but modern life sciences cannot still explain consciousness. We all experience consciousness. We all know that we are conscious, but that is not something that is even discussed, or that term even is not used in the modern life sciences. So he starts by using a very, very simple example of consciousness. A man observing a thermometer. So this picture is, again, I have some pictures in the talk, and this picture, all these are taken from the book, Mechanistic and Not Mechanistic Science, which I'm holding in my hand here. And all these books are back available in print, thanks to BIHS, His Grace Brahmatirtha Prabhu, Prishni Mataji, and all their hard work to bring them back in on Amazon.com. So a man is observing a thermometer, and what does he go through? So the first and the most important part is that he observes, or he feels conscious. And everybody realizes in his own self that I am conscious. So Sadaputa Prabhu tries to analyze this from a mechanistic standpoint, that if mechanistic science or the mechanistic theories can explain everything, then let's try to see where is consciousness in this picture. So in this picture, we see a man looking at an object through his eyes. Somehow that those signals are transmitted somehow to some parts of the brain, and then the brain maybe, transmits back a response, and the man ends up saying, I see a thermometer. So how does this all happen? And we all can understand that this is due to consciousness. We are a conscious person, so we are able to do that. So let's try to find consciousness in this whole picture. So when a man is observing a thermometer, he, to try to break it down, light falls on the object. Those photons, or those rays of lights, enter his eyes, his retinal cells. Some picture is formed on the retina. Then the nerve cells carry those signals and through an optical nerve and to the brain, and some electrochemical or some reactions occur in the brain, which is extremely complex. And there is some modification in the chemical concentrations or some electrical potential, in the brain, some things happen. And the brain realizes what it is seeing, and somehow the brain comes up with a response into motor nerves. And in this case, we are talking about the man saying something, so to his tongue, to his throat, which results in some kind of muscular contractions. And the man says, I see a thermometer. So this is what ends up happening. And all this is happening because the man is a conscious person. So how do we find consciousness in this picture? So one can argue that we can try to understand consciousness by analyzing it mechanistically. And one can say that I can build a machine that can do the above. And since the machine is built by us, we understand everything that's there inside the machine. So we can say we understand what is going on. So we can have a camera which takes, is observing some objects. We can have some algorithm, some image detection, whether it's a thermometer or an apple or a book. And the algorithm is able to do some kind of object recognition. And then there is a response system with some probably pre-recorded responses. These days we have Chat GPT, and all that has come up since 6 months ago, when that did not exist. So maybe that can come up with a more meaningful looking response. Maybe it can even write a poetry about the object it is seeing, and say it out loud in a nice voice. But everybody will agree that this machine cannot be a conscious entity. So, and everybody will also agree that I, as a person, am a conscious person, that I am able to observe the world, come up with responses in my mind, because I am conscious. I am also able to observe other conscious beings and observe their consciousness as well. And because they are like me, I also understand that they must be conscious too. So it would be absurd to kind of assume that I'm the only conscious being and everybody else around me is not. Sadaputa Prabhu calls that solipsism, and I mean, it's not his term, but it's a generic term, and that's an absurd thought that I am the only one conscious and everybody else is not. So in the same way, like we are conscious, others are also conscious. So let's try to find this consciousness in the mechanistic model that we just constructed, or in the mechanistic model that we want to explain this in our eyes and brain and so on. So the first step, he says, how do we find consciousness? In all the biology and chemistry that we study, there is no mention of consciousness. But if consciousness exists, which we just now said very emphatically and very convincingly, it exists somewhere. So can we find it? How do we find consciousness? And if consciousness is mechanistic, we should be able to see it. So what all is there in this whole series, in this whole chain of events and objects in the material space? Let us try to go deeper, look closer with a microscope, with instruments, with so many things, and try to see if we can get any hint which we can then explore or expand upon to find consciousness. So the first step that he goes into is the neurons. A neuron is a single nerve cell. I think I have a picture on the next slide, yes. So this is again taken from the book as well. And we see here a network of neurons, then a single neuron. I'll come to the third picture in a little bit. So these neurons are present in our nerve cells, in our brain, etc. And then if you further break it down, these neurons have very complex particles called organelles. If you see this second picture in the middle, a single neuron, it's not just a static block. There's a lot of sub objects inside it, a lot of activity that is going on inside this single neuron. And one of the objects that has been discovered by the scientists is called, and they've given it the name organelle. So we look at all these objects and we still don't see consciousness. Then within an object like an organelle, which is a part of that single cell called a nerve cell or a neuron, there are protein molecules. There is the globular protein. So that is what is depicted in the third picture, a protein molecule within a neuron. And this is a very, very complex molecule comprising of thousands of atoms. So as you can see in the lower bullet, even an a most studied single cellular organism. So we are jumping from a single neuron to another single cellular organism called E. coli bacteria. It's I myself did some searches and study, even though I'm not a biologist or a life scientist, but it's the most studied single cellular organism, the E. coli bacteria. And it contains about 2,000 to 3,000 types of proteins, and each protein consists of thousands and thousands of atoms. And even today, even though mechanistic and non-mechanistic science was written about 30 plus years ago, even today, we do not have a complete description of the E. coli bacteria. Every single protein, every single construction, and every single sub object within an E. coli bacteria has not been completely decomposed. As we would say, a machine has been, my car or a computer chip might have been decomposed. So that level of understanding we do not have even of an E. coli bacteria. And of course, when we cannot understand the whole structure, we first of all do not find consciousness anywhere in that study. And secondly, when we do not even have a full description of it, maybe we don't even understand how it works, let alone trying to find consciousness in the picture. We may be missing many other things as well apart from consciousness. So then Sadaputa Prabhu says, let's go deeper. Now, since we didn't find consciousness at this level, let's see what exists next. So then he says, okay, we went from a network of neurons to a single neuron to protein cells or protein molecules within a neuron. Now, what's a molecule made of? Atoms. So he says, let's go down, let's go deeper into that, into atoms. So from molecules, we come to atoms, and we know that atoms are made up of subatomic particles, protons, neutrons, electrons, and now we know quarks and other elements of the standard model. And what branch of science describes the mechanistic model at this level? And the answer to that is quantum mechanics. That describes the interactions between these subatomic particles, how they behave, and that's the most stable, the most the best theory that we have that explains the mechanistic model of subatomic particles. Now he says, okay, we drew the picture of a man with a brain, with optical nerves and an eyeball, with retina and so on. We could draw a picture of neurons and a protein molecule. What picture could we draw for quantum mechanics, or the quantum mechanical mechanistic model of a subatomic at the subatomic level? It says even a picture does not exist. It's just equations and symbols that are solved by a computer. So there is a picture. If you go, it's an electron density map. This is not an electron density map that has actually been observed or photographed. These other pictures are photographs, or probably artists drawing of a photograph. I don't know which. Maybe Mother Prishni can tell us how these were actually taken. But this is a computer-generated electron density map. So again, the point is that there were equations, there were computers that came up with an electron density map, which were plotted on a graph, which looks like this picture. So this picture is the output of not a camera or some instrument that took a real photograph, but it is a computer-generated model from data that results from equations of quantum mechanics. So I hope that part is clear so far. Okay, so now we see this quantum mechanical model, and he says, let's try to understand how to find consciousness here. So we can't see any element. There's no even discussion. It's even one step farther from the life sciences about trying to even mention the word consciousness into quantum mechanics and the equations. There is no variable that captures consciousness in Schrodinger's equation or in any other equation that we may use in quantum mechanics. So he says, let's go deeper. It's ultimately equations that are, and these equations are so complex that you do not have what you call synthetic solutions to these equations. You have to have numerical solutions to these equations. You cannot like solve them on a sheet of paper. A mathematician, just by his mathematical synthetic analysis, cannot solve these equations. You have to just solve them numerically, and through numerical analysis means you test numbers that work for an equation, and you keep narrowing down till you come within the accepted margin of error, and that becomes your answer to the solution, or that becomes your solution to the equation. And only a computer can do that. Otherwise, nobody else can do it. So he says, ultimately, these equations are solved by a computer. So we have to go into a computer to find, that's the next deeper level, because that's what helps to understand the equations or make meaning out of the equations. So what's a computer? And I have compressed this part into a few smaller number of pages or smaller number of slides, but he has a beautiful explanation in the book where he says that, a computer takes in a computer algorithm written in a particular language, which churns data, and which is both the program and the data can be represented in terms of bits and bytes, and that's basically a bunch of zeros and ones. So what we have, and he has a nice picture here of depicting just zeros and ones. In the book, he had more of a picture of an assembly language code, and then that further decomposes into zeros and ones in the memory of the computer, and so on, in the registers, etc. So and he makes such a brilliant and a funny observation that we started off trying to find consciousness in such a sort of a complex and a vibrant world, a real world of a man looking at an object and describing it, and we have reduced it to a bunch of zeros and ones, and we could not find consciousness. And there, this aspect of our innate of modern mechanistic model of reductionism also comes out so strongly, how we reduce such complex aspects into such fundamental mechanistic models, which works great, by the way, for solving mechanistic problems, but it provides zero insight and zero explanation about consciousness or anything that is or similar things, and therefore this picture cannot be complete. We have where else will you go beyond zeros and ones? There is no lower level to go to below that. Ultimately, he says you could write 0 and 1 on a piece of paper with pen and ink, and that's about it. And then we know everything about how pen and ink works, and obviously that is not conscious. So how do we explain and how do we find consciousness? We took a man looking at a thermometer, we reduced it to zeros and ones. So consciousness cannot be observed mechanistically. So like this, he says, if this analysis or if this thought process was correct, then we could not find consciousness. Therefore, he says consciousness is not a part of the mechanistic model. It can, and it seems absurd. Any layman, any ordinary person who is not even has never studied science will acknowledge that he is conscious. So it can be observed very easily at a personal level. You don't need all this mechanistic model and quantum mechanics to observe consciousness. So, and a conscious person can very easily say that he is conscious. So that brings us to the third bullet, that the consciousness is the sole perceiver of itself. So these are the three conclusions that he makes, that consciousness cannot be observed mechanistically. It can only be observed personally. And within a person, it is the consciousness of that person that is able to observe consciousness. So consciousness is the sole perceiver of itself. So, and then he talks about some observations or quotes from two famous scientists. One is Eugene Wigner, who is a Nobel Prize winner in physics. And another is Thomas Huxley. I don't think I included Thomas Huxley's quotes in the slides, but they are there in the book. Yeah. So, but anyway, Eugene Wigner says that there are two, and this is beautiful. I love this, and how Sadaputa Prabhu knows which quotes to pick and put in the book. I'll read these aloud, and this is just so hard-hitting. Eugene Wigner says there are two kinds of reality or existence. The existence of my consciousness and the reality or existence of everything else. The latter is not absolute, but only relative. So the reality or existence of everything else is a relative thing. And he will clarify that why is that so in the next sentence. What he's saying is that the existence of my consciousness is the more fundamental reality. Why is that? In other words, Wigner is observing that external measurable phenomena are known to him only by virtue of his consciousness. And thus, consciousness is, if anything, more real than these phenomena. So because we are conscious beings, we can observe the reality outside of us. So what's more real, the consciousness that is allowing us to observe that reality, or that reality outside us? Sadaputa Prabhu says that, and Eugene Wigner says that, and Sadaputa Prabhu is explaining it, that the latter, the outside world, is less real than the consciousness. Because we can observe the external world, we are more real than the external world, or we are at least as real. Our consciousness is at least as real, if not more, than the external world. And it's a very profound statement. It's a very, very strong testimony to the existence of consciousness. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense as to who is the observer. The observer is as mechanistic as the outside world. So then Sadaputa Prabhu changes track and says, how do we find a solution? So this is another point that I really, really like in all the writings of Sadaputa Prabhu, is that there are many, many people that I have read books and articles of, and they will stop here. They will mention problems with modern science. They will coming to this point is not that hard, saying, oh, there is no explanation of consciousness. Let's try to find consciousness here and there and there. And you will do a very, very thorough thought experiment, or even a real experiment. And you will say, see, there's no consciousness, and therefore modern science is incomplete. Some people would even go even farther and say modern science is useless, even though they may be using all the things of modern science provides, like taking antibiotics when they're sick, or traveling in aeroplanes, or using cell phones, and all the other things. So the Prabhu never does that. So he's a true scientist himself, and however, he points out the deficiencies of science. And the beauty is that he goes to the next step and proposes an alternate model. That's the hard part. You can say what's wrong with the other person, but if he also continues to say that there's everything wrong with you, then it's it's a no-win argument. But if you can have something to propose as an alternate model, then, or an alternative to what you are refuting, then there is some progress or possibility of progress. And that's where Sadaputa Prabhu shines so brilliantly. So he goes in and proposes an alternate model based on the Bhagavat Purana, the Bhagavad Gita, and the other Vedic texts. So he says that there is an alternate model to explain the nature of consciousness. And he proposes a set of 8 axioms, very beautiful, very brilliant, in my opinion, set of 8 axioms, which should be the starting point to explain the nature of consciousness. So first we have to start with axioms. Axioms, and these are axioms of the non-mechanistic model. So he wastes no time in saying that this is a non-mechanistic model. Axiom, as you all probably understand, are fundamental statements that we must accept to build the rest of the theory on. Just for as an example, like even in Euclidean geometry, we have axioms. One of the fundamental axioms of Euclidean geometry is that 2 parallel lines do not meet. And if you challenge that axiom, all of Euclidean geometry falls apart. So you must accept that 2 parallel lines shall never meet. There is no other proof of that. So in the same way, these are some fundamental axioms, but which make common sense. It's not outside the domain of common sense that 2 parallel lines never meet. That's something we can easily accept. So all these axioms that he mentions from the non-mechanistic model, from the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavad Purana, are fairly easy to accept, at least in my opinion. Others can give their own judgment or have their own judgment within themselves. So, and the other beautiful way, or the part that he mentions, the way he mentions is that this is not the truth. He speaks like a true scientist. Many other people will say, oh, this is the truth. To appeal to the scientific community or the common man with a scientific bent, nobody likes to be told what is it is this or you are wrong. So he proposes a model and he says, this is not the truth, but an idea of what may be possible or what may possibly be true. And then let's investigate, give others a chance to explore, think about it, and slowly the scientific theories become firmer and firmer and firmer. And that's how science advances. That's quite contrary, by the way, to the manner in which in the Vedic system of learning, through the Shabda Praman, through the learning the truths, through the descending knowledge that we received from authorized or bona fide sources, we take that differently. So I would just want to say that for those who are very familiar with that aspect, this is not the same as this, because modern science does not have this descending knowledge from an authoritative source as the valid model. It's about a ascending process where we start with theories and firm them up with more logic or observational results. So to appeal to that group of people, he's saying this sentence, and which I feel is a very, very appropriate approach if we ever have to appeal to that kind of a community. So he says it's not the truth, but an idea of what may possibly be true. And these axioms are the starting point. Of course, he doesn't say that I have explained everything in the book, and now we are all done. We are all the wiser. Axioms provide just a hint of how to investigate the model. And only by some positive investigation can the value of the model be established. By some positive effort, by more people trying to investigate it, we might mature this model further. Even though, of course, a lot of maturity exists in the Puranas and the Vedas, however, this is the way he puts it, which I like so much. So then he starts giving those attributes. So he first says that there is something non-mechanistic called the Jivatma. This Jivatma, or the spirit soul, is the elementary unit of consciousness. So it is the most fundamental unit. You cannot go deeper than this, like we said, a nerve cell, then a organelle or an object within that, then a protein molecule, then atoms, and so on and so forth. We were trying to break it down further and further and further. He's saying this as an axiom, the Jivatma is the most fundamental element. You cannot break that down further. And he says that this Jivatma is a non-mechanistic or a non-physical entity. So this is one aspect, and consciousness is present or is there due to the presence of the Jivatma. Consciousness is a symptom or a effect of the presence of the Jivatma. So the Jivatma is the cause of consciousness. So basically the point is then we should study Jivatma. And Jivatma is irreducible, which means it's the elementary unit. You cannot reduce it further. And it is an inherent feature of reality, not a physiochemical process. So consciousness is an inherent feature of the Jivatma. It's not a mechanistic output of the presence of Jivatma. That Jivatma may be non-mechanistic, but consciousness is somehow mechanistic. Even that, he says, is not the case. Consciousness as well is an inherent feature of the of reality, and it's not a physiochemical process. Then the second point he says, so first he defines what is a Jivatma. The second point then he says is there are innumerable Jivatmas and they can neither be created nor destroyed. So there are 2 points that he mentions in this, that there are innumerable Jivatmas. We are all conscious. So there's a Jivatma in you, there's a Jivatma in me. And so you cannot study their creation or destruction either. They were not created, they're Anadi and Ananta. I'm using these terms from the Bhagavad Gita or the Bhagavad Puran, but neither be created nor destroyed. They have been there from time immemorial, and they will continue to exist forever. So that is one point. So you cannot study there is no even option to study their origin or their destruction. And the second point is that consciousness is individual. Since there is a Jivatma in everyone, everybody experiences individual consciousness. So that's the second point. The third point is that all Jivatmas are qualitatively equal. So there is no difference in this Jivatma within you, within me. We are all individual Jivatmas that are completely equal. So this establishes the principle of universal equality, that everybody is equal. And he says, therefore, in a subtle way, this kind of does not support the theory of natural selection, that somehow one was a little bit better than the other, and therefore that ended up surviving more and multiplying more, and the other one died out. And that sort of the mechanistic model of natural selection and the Darwinian evolution is out of the window because of the third axiom. That's a consequence of the third axiom, but that's what it says, that all Jivatmas are qualitatively equal. And that establishes a principle of equality. Now, the next one is the next 2 axioms that he mentions are regarding the fact that Jivatma is not mechanistic, or Jivatma cannot be measured. So he says that the Jivatmas are not numerically describable. You cannot describe a Jivatma exclusively in numbers. It's not a mechanistic object. You cannot say this is how much it measures, this is how much it weighs, this and that. Although he says it can exhibit quantifiable attributes, such as position in space and so on. Where is a Jivatma? It's here, not here. It could be possible like that, but you cannot completely describe it in mechanistic terms. So he says that any attempt to numerically fully numerically describe a Jivatma will be significantly incomplete. It does not mean that they cannot apply at all. Some numeric attributes can be present, but there will be significant incompleteness if you just use that as the attributes of a Jivatma. The next one is that the Jivatmas obey higher order psychological laws involving qualities and modes of activity that are not amenable to mathematical formulation. So there are certain laws, so the Jivatma follows, but these laws are not mechanistic laws. These are not laws of physics. Every law of physics has an equation. There is no law of physics that does not have an equation. So, but these laws that the Jivatma follows, there are laws it follows. Absolutely, like matter follows laws. You can say Newton's laws, or you add relativistic kinematics to it, or more and more. This Jivatma also follows similarly laws, but those laws are not mathematical formulas or cannot be written down in a numerical manner. So that's the other thing. And these laws are psychological laws, and that's where in the introduction section he says, if everything has been described mechanistically, where is the question of good and bad? And one of the beautiful things, I'll go back to the introduction, which Brahmatirtha Prabhuji very nicely described last 2 weeks ago. One of the brilliant points made by Sadaputa Prabhu was, if natural selection was the right model, then assuming that it has this aspect of being a good person and all that is included within that model, why isn't the world becoming more good and good and good? If it's natural selection, then we should see goodness rising in the world. And, that's natural selection. So why isn't that happening? So that's because it does not, and this axiom kind of attacks or addresses that question, because there are laws it follows, but not the laws of natural selection, or how you multiply, or certain attributes that, a giraffe could eat fruits that are, not accessible to other animals. So it survived and the others died out, and it ended up with a long neck. So, or the long-necked giraffe kind of outlived the short-necked giraffe, or whatever. So there are laws that it follows, but these are not mathematical laws. There are higher order psychological laws. Very, very beautiful point or axiom. I was thinking one time, if I were to stop reading the book just before the axioms and try to attempt to write down these axioms myself, or some axioms myself, I probably could not even come up with one. Or maybe, because I have read the Bhagavad Gita, maybe I could come up with one or two. But, the way he has, this is the beauty of Sadaputa Prabhu, which we all love and share amongst us. And these are I would say these last three are the most beautiful part of the chapter. It's about the interaction of the Jivatmas with each other and with matter. So let me see, this is the last slide. Yeah. So the Jivatmas do not interact with matter according to the known laws of physics, such as laws of gravity or laws of electromagnetism. So this is what the Jivatma does not do in its interaction with matter. It does not interact with matter, period. So Jivatma cannot interact and does not interact with matter. Okay, how does it interact with matter? I can interact with matter. Where is it? I'm holding a pencil in my hands. So I wanted to, while I'm on this Zoom call, I wanted to show you that I can interact with matter. So I found a pencil and I held it in my hand. So I had the desire and I held up a pencil as a consequence. So I am interacting with matter. The Jivatma in me, I, the conscious person, interacted with matter right here in front of your eyes. So how does it interact? So the Jivatma, so that's the seventh axiom. The Jivatma possesses self-reflective conscious awareness, and they possess innate senses capable of perceiving both matter and other conscious entities. So this provides an understanding of conscious perception obtained from a sensory machinery of a body. So he gives a very beautiful example. That seventh axiom may be a bit complicated to understand, but he provides a very, very beautiful example. And I think I have never seen this example anywhere else. So I think this is Sadaputa Prabhu's original sort of conception of this example, and it fits so beautifully, so naturally. So the example is, he says that like a pilot that is flying a plane through dense clouds. So even though the pilot may have a window through which he can really actually see what's outside the plane, since it's very dense outside, he virtually is blinded. He's flying blind pretty much, as if the windows did not exist. But we all know that pilots can fly planes very easily, even through dense clouds. How do they do that? There is an external sensory apparatus like radar, altimeter, other, thousands of other sensors in the aeroplane that provide, and then those sensors provide data that appear on various screens and other, panels on the pilot's in front of his eyes and ears, and he wears headphones and who knows what all. I'm not a pilot, but he gets all this external sensory perception from all these thousands of sensors, so that even if he cannot directly see what's outside, he gets a pretty good picture. It's a limited picture, but enough for him to fly the plane safely. And then he consumes those sensory inputs and then, flies the plane however he wants to fly, turn it this way or that way or whatever. So that pilot is akin or is like the soul or the Jivatma, who is using an external sensory apparatus to perceive the external world and receive those inputs, and is able to respond to those back into that sensory or the working senses. So in the Puranas, we know there's the 5 knowledge acquiring senses and the 5 working senses, the Gyanendriyas and the Karmendriyas. So anyway, I won't go into that, but that is how it interacts. It receives input and provides output and is able to navigate his way through this mechanistic world. So that is the way the Jivatma interacts, just like a pilot interacts with his little panel of instruments in front of him, and with a limited picture provided by those apparatus, he's able to successfully navigate through dense fog or dense clouds. And that is how the Jivatma is navigating through this material world through matter. Now comes another very, very important point. So this is how the Jivatma is working, but he says there is a better way for Jivatmas to interact. And he says that Jivatmas tend to be associated with material bodies, like a pilot is typically associated with a plane. Where would you find, what's a good place to find a pilot? In an aeroplane, in the cockpit. You go there and you'll find a pilot. So similarly, Jivatmas generally tend to be associated with material bodies. But if you ask the pilot, is the natural place of happiness for him to be in the cockpit? No, there are 10,000 other places he could be. He could be with his family, he could be in a restaurant or in a park or wherever else. So the Jivatmas, though they tend to be associated with material bodies, they are not dependent on matter and are fully capable of functioning without material connections. So the Jivatmas can exist outside of a body as well, just like a pilot can exist outside an aeroplane. And when they are outside, they can interact much better with other Jivatmas. Imagine if two pilots were to talk to each other. And whenever they have to talk to each other, instead of directly talking to each other, they say, oh, you're a pilot, I'm a pilot, we need to talk. Let's get into our respective aeroplanes and then talk through our, apparatus. How much meaningful or valuable conversation can they have like that? A much better way of having a conversation between two pilots is to sit in a restaurant with a cup of coffee or a tea and talk directly face to face, and leave the airplanes outside. Sitting in the airplanes and talking to each other is not the best way. That may be the best way to talk when you're like fighting a war and two fighter pilots have to communicate with each other, but not otherwise. So that's a forced situation, not a natural situation. Similarly, he says that if two jivatmas have to communicate with each other, and if they are having to communicate through their bodies or the sensory apparatus of their bodies, it's a suboptimal mechanism or a suboptimal way of communicating between two jivatmas. A far more rich and more productive, effective interaction, a more direct interaction can occur, which is more powerful when the jivatmas, when there is no intermediate apparatus used. And then you can have way more rich and meaningful conversations between jivatmas. And imagine, he says, that if there were a group of such awakened beings and together they could study consciousness in this awakened state without being hindered, without being limited by the body or the sensory apparatus that they are enclosed in. Imagine what results we could get from such a study. And with the same objectivity, they could, like the scientists do in a lab, these awakened beings could study consciousness, and we could get a whole lot more value and knowledge by such exploration. And that's very natural also. He says that when a group of awakened beings, self-realized souls, when they communicate with each other, then they are able to present the various realities of the world, which science cannot even fathom. So these are the 8 axioms. And he says, using these 8 axioms, we can try to understand or try to build an alternate theory of consciousness. So that's almost the end of the chapter. And then the question becomes, how can the pilot get out of the aeroplane? The pilot is so strapped within the aeroplane, only if he can come out, he can have these meaningful conversations with other pilots who are also strapped in their respective aeroplanes. So, which is akin to the soul sort of getting self-realized or reaching this higher level of existence, not encumbered by the sensory apparatus that is enclosing it. So he says that by chanting these names or these words, Hare Krishna and Rama, the Jivatma can awaken itself and disassociate itself from the effects of matter. And he says that these sounds, Hare and Krishna and Rama, are not mechanistic sounds either. Otherwise, you are trying to use a mechanistic process to go above the mechanistic enclosure. That's not the point. So he mentions that these names or these sounds or symbols have an absolute meaning outside the realm of numerical describability. So yes, you can measure the frequencies and the amplitude. You can record the sound Hare Krishna, and do a whole Fourier analysis on it, which would make it numerical, but that is not what it is. What it is that it is outside the realm of numerical describability. It's an absolute symbol with an eternal meaning in any units of measurement. It has no mechanistic measurement at all. And these symbols are perceived directly by the senses of the Jivatma. these symbols do not go through, even though it may appear that when I'm saying these words, it's going through my ear, just like the thermometer was going through, or the light through the thermometer was going through the eyes and the retina and the nerve cells. It may appear that these sounds are going through my ears, but that's not the case. He says these sounds are perceived directly by the senses of the Jivatma. This is like a signal which bypasses the aeroplane's apparatus and is directly able to reach the pilot somehow, like a, Akashvani, or I don't know what, something like that. It completely bypasses the aeroplane's systems and is able to directly reach the pilot inside. That is the meaning, or that's how these sound symbols, Hare Krishna and Rama, are to be understood. And he says that even in physics, we have such absolute constants. He mentions this thing called a fine structure constant. I don't know much about it. The name was given by a person called Sommerfeld, and but basically it's absolute constant. It is dimensionless, and it is one of the very few absolute constants independent of it. It just has a meaning in itself. I don't understand much of it. It's in something in the domain of quantum field theory. Maybe Doug Prabhu here can explain that much better than I can. But Sadaputa Prabhu gives these examples that it's not unnatural to say that there is this absolute symbol, even those exist even in modern physics. So it's not such a wild idea to propose that. These are some of the beautiful aspects, or the aspects of Sadaputa Prabhu, that make his books and his writings and his talks, which are all available on the website, richardlthompson.com, which is linked to from the BIHS main website. All that material is available, and I've been reading it and relishing it for many years. I think that's the end. Yes. So that's the summary of the first chapter. All glories to Sadaputa Prabhu and to Srila Prabhupada.
Hi. Thank you very much, Parma Puruna. That was great. Thank you for explaining that. So we'll take a few moments for questions, comments. We'll have a short discussion. If anyone has any questions, you can type it into the chat or just raise your hand. I am adding the quote that you mentioned by Huxley into the chat, if anyone wants to see it. And is it okay? I have a question for you. I may have misunderstood something, but you mentioned that the theory of Darwinian evolution goes out the window if axiom number 3 is true, which is that all Jivatmas are equal. And then a related thought, if you can just explain that to me, because then the related thought was that the reason why that you're saying that the quality of goodness doesn't play a role in natural selection, but my understanding is that the jiva is non-mechanistic, and the mechanistic qualities that do play a role in natural selection are physical, such as strength or power of survival or something like that. So maybe you can just clarify that for me.
I think the point that Sadaputa Prabhu was making, and as I understood it, is that if anyone tries to apply the Darwinian model on the Jivatmas themselves, then that would fail because of the third axiom. The Jivatmas are all qualitatively exactly equal, and therefore there can never be any kind of one is better than the other. Therefore some kind of discrimination can be made between one or the other, and therefore theories like natural selection or any other theories that may exist that depend on some kind of discrimination are all nullified on Jivatmas.
Okay, I understand. Thank you for saying. So he's saying
that's
that
how I understood it.
Yeah, so that it does not apply to the jiva, even though it applies. Potentially, it can apply
Potentially
in the material world. Okay,
yes.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else have any questions or concerns? Not concerns, comments. Sorry.
Concerns are fine too.
Concerns too.
I guess to follow up on that, yeah, it sounds, Darwinian theory. So what aspect of Darwinian, that just applies to, as far as it has an application, is material cause and effect. You know how to track biological change over time. And then of course the discussion on the quality of the jiva and its relationship to Krishna, that's not handled at all by Darwinian theory. So, you know, I don't know if this undermines directly speculations on Darwinian theory. Natural selection and so forth applies to you know, biological existence.
Agreed, 100%. So the point I think I was making, and as I understood Sadaputa Prabhu, was that if anyone tries to apply this to the Jivatma, then that would conflict with the third axiom.
Yeah, so as far as they can handle a jiva, it's like consciousness, you know, and then it's like into the fog they enter. You know, you know, even the biggest evolutionists will, I mean, they'll act like they know what it is, but when it comes down time to saying, you know, what is it? They say they don't know. You know, so in their sober moments, they do admit they don't know, but then of course everybody thinks they know everything.
Right.
Except for us, we don't know everything, and that's knowing everything.
Go ahead. Pracharananda here has a comment or
You
question.
don't know what microphone I'm talking on. Hello, everybody. I was going to say, first of all, Prabhu, wonderful presentation. I feel like you encapsulated that all so nicely and summarized it so nicely in very clear language. And so that was very well done. What did you ask for? Questions or complaints? I don't have a complaint.
No, concerns.
Concerns. Yeah, I do have
Comments.
two concerns I'd like to mention. The first one is when discussing the neurons and this classical reductionist breakdown of how it goes from a neural network to an individual neurological cell to the, oh, here I am. I don't know if that was necessary. Hi. And so on and so forth in this reductionist model down to the digital code that you presented. I think this is an area where Sataputa's work may have become a little bit outdated and could use some updating from the assembly of saintly people that he mentioned in his last axiom, which is to say that I think even modern neurologists and people who study consciousness have stopped looking at the individual parts of these systems as to what governs them, but to look at the holistic interaction of the system. And that may be an area where we could enter into the conversation through more and more of Sataputa's axioms. So that was just a comment or a thought that I had.
Excellent.
Yeah, and then the other one is about the axioms themselves. And when you were discussing them, I pulled the book over here just to see when it was published originally, which was in 1981. And I think for 1981, that was an excellent attempt. But in the world of scientific axioms, and it is fully appropriate to create axioms upon which to build a scientific model, these ones seem overcomplicated to me. And perhaps that there's a way to, yeah, the Bhagavatam itself, we've been reading at the Bhaktivedanta Academy, the second canto of the Bhagavatam, where the appearance of consciousness along with the material elements and the senses with which to perceive their subtle forms all come into play at once. So perhaps this is an area where consciousness and cosmology tie in together quite directly.
Oh, well, you're
Those are my concerns. Thank you.
Okay.
you're just a geologist.
I don't think that was a question or something. Yeah, I probably
There was
agree with what you said.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. I just threw that out there to try to stimulate a discussion.
We have a hand up,
My
Ramananda,
car
and
service.
then also Bimbadar, I think, will follow next.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Brahma Karuna Prabhu, for your talk. I was appreciating the analogy with the pilots and the planes. I hadn't heard that one before, like you were saying. In terms of interacting with one another, Atmas interacting with one another, I was thinking that, let's say there's a pilot in a plane and another pilot in a plane comes along and hits his plane. There might be a kind of psychological disturbance because I associate with the plane. I might get frustrated, angry. That's happened to me when I was in a car and someone hit my car. I was shook up and then I got angry and frustrated. But when we take that to us being in a material body, I feel physical pain. It seems different from psychological disturbance, and I'm wondering, can we incorporate this into the analogy of the pilot, or any of these kind of analogies? Just wondering if you have any thoughts, or if Sadaputa speaks about this particular topic.
Well, he doesn't speak about it, and I'm just completely unqualified to extend the analogy to that. I could come up with some stupid arguments, or which I would refrain from, but yeah, that's something to think about. And in many cases, analogies are analogies to the extent that they are applicable. But yeah, that's a good point. Maharaj
Okay,
has
thank
his
you.
hand up.
Oh, William Jones had his hand up, I mean, physically, but I think he wasn't noticed.
Yes, I'd like to thank Parama Karuna for his tremendous presentation and mention one fact that so far it seems as if the axioms are avoiding direct criticism of evolutionary theory, but later on in the book, Sadaputa definitely takes a good shot at the evolutionary theory.
Yes.
Dave, you're up next.
Oh, I appreciate the presentation very much. And it's just very impressive to see all these intelligent people gathered here for the right purpose. And I saw William holding his hand up, and so I just wanted to point that out because he hadn't been noticed.
Yes. Sadaputa Prabhu, of course, evolution and all that, but he, in his lectures and books, he also acknowledges that natural selection and evolution works to a certain extent. He talks about the experiment with fruit flies and how they demonstrate natural selection and so on. So to a certain extent, it works. But to say that from matter came a single cellular organism, and from there came fish and reptiles and mammals, and here we are, is a little bit of a stretch.
That's true. Thank you. We have a question here by Esther.
I'm Esther. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very fascinating. I heard two words put together that I had not before, and I wonder if you have any insight on this, or maybe I tried to see if it was something that was addressed later, but you said only by positive investigation can the value of the model be established. So I'm wondering if you want to give maybe a description of positive investigation, or maybe put that into a context for me. I'm interested in what that means. What is a positive investigation in this context?
Sure. So that was right before the axioms.
Yeah, it's right before one. Yeah.
Yep. And this is, as I understood, again, it's just too very unfortunate, extremely unfortunate that Sadaputa Prabhu left us all early. I so wish that he was still within us, and definitely it would have been within his age to be with us at this moment, to answer all these questions, and we could all directly hear from him. So as I understood, this is his way of mentioning or establishing his credibility with the scientific community, where he is saying that he's not saying, I have all the answers. All my answers come from the Bhagavad Puran. So you all lowly beings here, take this book and become enlightened. That's how many people approach, with from kind of, and then they're branded as creationists and religionists and oppressors. So that's absolutely, I'm not even saying that he even had that approach at the back of his mind. It's the approach that modern science appreciates, that we take hypotheses, we try to work on it collectively, and firm it up gradually over a period of time to form firm scientific theories. So in my understanding, what he's saying is that here is a possible alternative model. I'm starting it off by giving certain axioms, and he develops those a little bit more throughout the book. But he says, here are some axioms, and let us together, it's an appeal to the larger community to put more work into it so that this overall model can be investigated and can be matured. So that's my understanding of that, by saying by positive investigation. And why the word positive is to invite some positive input into it, instead of again, a finger pointing between, so to say, the realists and the creationists, the age-old argument between science and religion.
I see. Okay, thank you very much for that answer and for your
That's
work.
my understanding, but there are many more very exalted devotees and personalities here on the call. Please feel free to add or correct what I said.
Thank you, Paramakruna. There's a question and a comment regarding that question in the chat, and then we'll go to the hand up by Young Hai. Swarga asked, where does individuality come in if all Jivatmas are exactly the same? And then the comment to that was, although all Jivatmas are identical in constitution, each has a uniquely independent point of view or observable angle of vision due to such individuality. So if you'd like to comment on that, please, or anyone else, and then we'll go to the next question or comment.
My comment is very similar to Langa Ganeshana Dasa, that the qualitative equality does not necessarily conflict with independent values or independent points of view that one carries. So there can be definitely individuality in thought, in views, by that equal conscious being, the Jivatma. At a very, very simplistic level, I don't want to, again, I may get into trouble or may get 20 more questions by saying this, like unity in diversity. So we all understand that statement to some extent. Many actually may not understand or may object to it, or this may spark a very lively debate. But still, to whatever extent we agree to that statement, we can see some sense in this argument of the diversity among Jivatmas, even though they are equal. So to whatever extent we understand that statement of diversity, unity in diversity, or diversity in unity, to that extent, we can understand how this may be possible.
Thank you very much. Okay, Young Hai, welcome.
Thank you. That was a fantastic presentation. It reminds me of my young days when I first read the Bhagavad Gita and really excited with the ideas there. My question is whether Jivatma is singular, kind of a singular consciousness, or is there any compositeness in itself?
Again, I will start it off and request other senior people or very knowledgeable people here to jump in if possible. But Jivatma is not a, what was the word you used? A composite.
Singular versus composite. The background of my question is actually Christian theology of Trinitarian doctrine. I mean, a human soul created in the image of God, who is Trinitarian. So the human soul, by definition, is composite. However you define it, many theologians define them or describe them in terms of threeness, like being, process, telos, or Father, Son, and Holiness, Holy Ghost, however you define it. So however you define human soul in Christian terms, I'm just wondering whether there's any parallel in Hindu philosophy.
I think Hridayananda Maharaj, did you raise your hand to potentially respond?
Yeah, I did.
I would really like to pass it on to you.
Thank you. And thank you for the question also. I think coming from our point of view, Bhagavad Gita, we would insist upon sort of an indivisible, singular nature of the individual soul. Krishna, in fact, says in the second chapter of the Gita that the soul is a chedya, indivisible. And in other places, he talks about it as being one. So as far as the Trinity doctrine, I think that's been philosophically problematic. I mean, clearly there's been a theological resolution within the community that holds that view, but I think it remains somewhat problematic from an ontological perspective. And so in that sense, with reference to Occam's razor, the Jivatma, the living soul, is seen as single, indivisible, and yet at the same time part of Krishna. Now here, just to be fair, Krishna uses the Sanskrit word angsha, which means a part of something. And so you could say if Krishna himself has a simple or indivisible nature, and yet there are parts. The conclusion I think for Krishna and for souls would be that there are aspects, to use sort of philosophical language, there are aspects or attributes of, let's say, the jiva, for example, Satchidananda, which are three qualities of the quality of being eternal, of being cognizant, and of being blissful, pleasure, knowledge, and existence. And so in terms of the jiva, these three qualities are, in fact, you could talk about many qualities of the jiva, but those are probably the three basic ones. And you could construct others, such as the ability to, like, let's say within the concept of ananda or bliss, there's a capacity to establish relationships with other living things. And so, and these relationships certainly influence the jiva. I mean, we're influenced positively and negatively by mundane and spiritual mundane relationships, but ultimately there is an ontological unity. Even in let's say ontologically comparing God and the soul, you don't have the claim that three different souls, let's say the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit, are somehow together God. There's not a composite God. And I mean, that Trinity idea has been criticized since it was formulated, actually, many, many centuries ago, as being not strictly monotheistic. And so
true, but that those threeness is not really three ontological separateness, but three manifestation of one essence, like a Satchit Ananda is a three kind of qualities and manifestations of what the consciousness with the capital C is. So it's not really we're talking about three ontologically separate beings.
Okay, so if I could ask a question then, because obviously you know more about it than I do, but in the case of Satchidananda, there's not a Sat person, a Chit person, and an Ananda person. So when I actually took a course in Augustinian theology, and if I remember correctly, St. Augustine wrote a multi-volume work defending the Trinity doctrine, and he said there were 7 basic tenets or 7 basic principles of the Trinity doctrine, which were that the Father is God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God, the Father is not the Son is not the Holy Spirit is not the Father, and the 7th one being God is one. And I think that is, again, if I remember correctly, that even Augustine, in his defense of Trinitarian doctrine, said that I mean, it would appear to many that there were logical problems. So in the different qualities or features of the soul, they're not separate persons, but it does seem to be if I understood it properly, that in the Trinity doctrine, there is the claim that the three members of the Trinity are all God, but are also separate persons.
Yes, there's a logical problem, as you said. Yes, this is more complex than it appears to be. Yes. Thank you for your comments. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you all very much for your questions, your comments, your participation. Please join us in 2 weeks, March 4th, 11 a.m. We'll continue session 3. That's going to be chapter 2, Thinking Machines and Psychophysical Parallelism by Parma Rupa, who is a lecturer in computer science at Tufts University School of Engineering. So thank you very much. We hope to see you again in 2 weeks. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leland. Thank you to the speaker.
And I want to personally thank Parma Karuna for so much work, so much intelligence, so much distillation. You and your sons are a great addition to the BI, and it's your sons who will actually have to do the hard work after my generation. So tell them to study hard.
Please bless me and please bless them that they can contribute a
Thanks.
little bit to Srila Prabhupada.
And we want you to visit again. Our remodel's almost done. My construction people tell me it'll be done within 30 years. And we really want you and your sons to visit again. It was a special privilege for us, Parma Karuna. Really, really
Absolutely.
was. Haribol.
Bye.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you again, Parma Karuna. We hope to see you again here soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you.